Hello, everyone. This is Ella from allwriterswelcome.com. We also have the Facebook group, All Writers Welcome Facebook group. And I am here with Rick Partlow. He's a military science fiction author and pretty all-around awesome guy that I just met, but he seems like a really nice guy. He's in Florida and doing a really awesome job of doing military science fiction stuff and writing. So, Rick, hello.
Hi there. How you doing?
I wanted to ask you a little bit about how did you get into writing? Because I saw on Amazon that you have quite a few books written. And I was just wondering, have you always been a writer, or what was your process to get you to where you're at now?
Well, I began writing when I was a young teenager, writing novels. I wrote short stories when I was a little kid, but I actually finished my first novel when I was in junior high, which was horrible and since thrown it away a long time ago. I wrote another one when I was a senior, which was also horrible. And then in college, I began to, even though I'd always enjoyed science fiction, I'd never tried to write a science fiction book. And I began to get an idea for a couple of different books. And I started to write them. And of course, being in college and being in the military, there was no time. And I just put it away and put it off. And finally, sometime in the mid-90s, I decided to sit down with a computer, which I just got, and write the books down. I wrote 2 books, and I had an agent, a literary agent, representing me. And we tried for a couple of years, but couldn't sell them. So again, I put them away. They kind of collected dust. I wrote a little bit, but mostly just coming up with ideas and not really finishing anything because we just had a child and I was very busy.
Yeah.
Finally, after many years, someone kept telling me over and over, you can publish your own book on Amazon. And to me, as somebody from a previous generation, I was thinking that's self-publishing. That's like vanity press stuff. That's something the real writers don't do, and if I can't get published the regular way, I'll just forget about it. But finally they talked me into it. And I put those 2 books, which had been very massively edited, very professionally, which was a blessing. It taught me how to edit, which I had no idea up till that point. I put them online and they sold quite a bit. So I started writing sequels and the rest is history.
Oh my gosh. How did that how did that feel when they started selling? What did that feel like?
Real. I mean, nobody had ever read these except for obviously the editors for the agent and a couple of friends. And then I sold, between the 2 books, the first year they were out, they sold 30,000 copies. Yeah, and I was like, wow, there's 30,000 people reading this. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's incredible. I have my book and it's not sold 30,000 copies, but I haven't put a lot of time and effort. But I know that feeling of there are people out there reading my book right now, or that's an incredible feeling because you have
it's amazing because I did everything wrong. I had no idea what I was doing at all. Like a lot of people in 2011, who were self-publishing.
Yeah.
I put a couple of public domain pictures with Photoshop titles. I didn't even shape them the right way. I didn't format it right. I just put it on there the way it was. Mm-hmm. And I put it for 99 cents a piece. And I figured, hey, a couple people buy them. That's cool. So.
Wow. Well, that I think brings up a point that I don't know if I don't know if it's brought up enough, is that if the story is good, if your story and your writing is good, some of the other things don't matter. If people can, I mean, they matter, but they aren't deal breakers, I
see that a lot. I see people asking, I paid $500 for this cover and $1,000 for professional editor and all this money for marketing, but I'm not selling as many books as I want to. What's wrong? And I'm thinking, well, is the book good?
Yeah.
You want to read it?
Yeah.
That's a question you have to ask yourself, because not everyone is. I've written a lot of stuff that's not good, hopefully not lately. It's not everything you write's going to be something people want to read.
Yeah.
And all the professional editing and covers aren't going to change that. You might have to try again.
Yeah. Or just really revise.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to revise or edit. Or I know Megan and I in the group sometimes talk about killing your baby. And it sounds terrible. It sounds like a terrible thing, but sometimes you're like, even though I love this bit of dialogue or I love this chapter, it's got to go sometimes, if that's what, because I think, like I was saying, people are okay with mistakes or in formatting or things if they can, because what the end result that people want is to be able to escape or whatever is to be in your world that you've created. Yeah, that's what they want. They want that. And so if you can create that for them, they're not going to mind a typo here or there. There will always be those people who are like, you have a typo, but but really I think that's the most important part. So I love that you had your first books came out that way. I think that's awesome. So what do you write about? Like I said the military science fiction, but what exactly?
Well, I have two different universes or worlds. One of them, the first book that I wrote was called Duty, Honor, Planet. And I wound up writing a trilogy of massive door stoppers. The longest was like 190,000 words.
Oh my gosh.
So, I have that trilogy, which is a military science fiction series that's set a couple hundred years from now. And it's kind of conventional. I mean, there's not a lot of alien stuff in it. It's mostly humans against humans, and mm-hmm. I don't know, I call it conventional. I mean, there's star travel and things like that, but it's not one of Star Trek type things where there's 20 different aliens and they all sound like humans. It's just, it's more to do with, at the end, there's some strange things. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but
don't spoil it.
Most of the first two books, it's just different human factions going against each other. The other series is called Birthright, and it's actually two series now because I have another series that's set in the same universe. And it's more out there with aliens and a lot of space opera. These ancient aliens that are lost and left behind high technology treasures that people look for. They're called the predecessors. Ooh. It's all really far out there. And I wrote a trilogy in that, and then I wrote a prequel about the main character called Glory Boy, which has been my most successful novel yet. And then I'm writing another series about another character in that same universe. The series name is Recon. So that's basically it.
Wow. So you have one set that's human, mostly human based. And I'm curious about, so the drama, because we all know that books are about conflict, right? If you just have a book where somebody's like doing their day-to-day life, it's boring. You're like, I don't need to read about this. This is my life. So you've got in the first set, it's conflict, all human based. And I'm curious about, how is it different between having alien conflict versus human conflict?
It's a lot easier doing human conflict because it's difficult writing believable aliens. Mm-hmm. I actually had to, in the Birthright universe, the main aliens that we have contact with were kind of engineered by this ancient predecessor race to be more like us, because they observed us and they thought, we can do better. And they went and engineered this other race. So that's the only excuse I can give to why they are so similar to us mentally, because I know it's been said by many people that if you went back in time to ancient Rome, the thought patterns of any of the people that lived there would be more alien to us than any alien that's ever been on TV. Yeah. And it's true. We can't get inside an alien's head. And there's several good writers who've been able to make a good attempt, but a lot of the science fiction I read, the aliens are just humans with bumps on their faces.
Well, and it makes sense because humans are the audience, and so we are interested in the kind of conflicts that are relatable, but still. But I agree with you in that there's gosh, and I haven't written science fiction, but I imagine that there's a real challenge between making it relating to humans, but then in my personal thoughts, or if there was aliens out there, surely if they had this, and I do believe there's aliens out there, but if they have the technology to like go through, the speed of light or whatever, they're not going to be thinking, they're not going to have the same problems that we have. So I bet, so is there a conflict, or is it, how do you work around that?
Around the fact that they're so different?
Yeah.
Well, like I said, the way I worked around it was to make it so that they were actually made to be more like us.
You did.
They're similar to us biologically, but I mean, just being bipedal with bilateral symmetry and stereoscopic vision isn't enough to make you think the same way. I mean, I don't think the same way that somebody does in the Philippines, or some other country, or China. We all think about our cultures differently. So it's very difficult to make something that's relatable to my audience, which is mostly Western people, speak English,
mm-hmm.
when I'm trying to get inside an alien's head. And the best that I could do was to try to, in those situations in the books where I actually try to get inside an alien's head, was to explore the differences in culture that arise from having a different biology. And they have different, just as an example, the name of the aliens are the Tani. They're the main aliens in this Birthright series. And they were engineered from a more primitive hominid state quickly up to tool using by these ancient predecessors. And it left them with remnants of evolutionary, I don't know what the word, but things that we've grown out of, like, for instance, a reproductive cycle that puts them
mm-hmm.
out of control, like, animals when they're in rut,
mm-hmm.
so that they kind of lose the ability to think rationally in that time.
Oh.
That's just something where they've been brought to a technological society, and yet they have a period where they lose the ability to have rational thought. So they separate their sexes, and they're not like, they don't discriminate against each other, but they can't be together for most of the time. And they only come together under carefully socially controlled situations where, like, okay, it's agreed that these two representatives of different families mm-hmm. will have children and they'll be the heirs. And then they come together for just that period of time, and then they separate again. They don't have marriages.
Yeah, so, just like so many animals do, where they're just like,
exactly,
like, oh, we're just living our lives, and then they come together, and then they're like, okay, now you're gone, like leopards or something. like you're just here for this, and then I'm like, yeah.
I actually got the idea more from, as I said, I'm a wildlife photographer, so I spent a lot of time mm-hmm. observing, different types of mammals, and I was like, that would be an interesting idea for society, where the males and the females live separately, come together, have children, and then the children are raised by the females to a certain point, and then they come out on their own.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that I'm like, ooh, what an interesting concept, but I'm not going to go veer off onto that because you wrote a book about it, but I am. But I am, so I want to ask you, because it sounds like I wanted to, because you talked about before we got on the call, and you told me that you were good with the world building. And this seems like that's kind of what we're talking about, is you started with these aliens, and how do you, you have got the people and they've got these different biologies. And so you have this, that's what seems like the seed start for the world building, but I don't know, how does that work for you?
I used to be, when I was younger and just getting into this, I used to think that world building was something I needed to do beforehand, like a huge setup. I would have huge computer files, and before that, notebooks full of information about the societies I was building. And then as I got more mature in my writing, I was like, this stuff can be useful, but it kind of gets in the way of a free-flowing narrative. And I decided that the best thing to do was to have like a framework inside my head, but mostly build the world as it sounded good in the story, as it supported the story rather than the other way around. So it's kind of like world building on the fly. If something about the idea of the culture and society I have in my head or written down doesn't agree, well, that's out the window, because the story sounding good is the important part, and being constrained by something like that can interfere. So I have actually changed whole societies in my book just because of one little passage. It sounded better.
Oh, yeah. I like that, because I think sometimes I can tell when I'm reading, and this is as a reader who's observing, that there's a magic to giving just enough information to make the story go forward, because then in later books you can change it if you need the story to move forward. Then you can add in whatever. It doesn't have to be a change, but if you already have the world built, I imagine that it's harder to. That's interesting.
Well, that's another thing that I have to admit, it kind of bugs me about a lot of science fiction that I read, is too much detail, too much exposition about technology and society. That should be something, when you're watching a movie, science fiction movie or whatever, they don't just sit there and lay out every detail about the society of the technology. You have to see it. You have to see it unfold, see it as it works. And sometimes they don't explain everything. And I like that. There's some things, particularly in the books that I wrote earlier, where I do put a lot of detail, and also I have to admit that a lot of military science fiction fans like a lot of detail about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I've always been of the opinion that should be something that you let out gradually as it feels natural to the story, and not just dump on there, 3 pages of Tom Clancy-esque, technical exposition.
Yeah, I like that. I appreciate that, because I'm thinking about like Star Trek. Okay, there are so many holes in the Star Trek stories, but people aren't watching it for that. They're watching it for the story. It's the story is the primary reason that people are there. The details and the technical details, those are secondary to the story, although they supplement the story, right? And so I love that you like, plus there's like a little bit of like, it's like breadcrumbs. You're like, here's a little bit more, here's a little bit more, here's a little bit more. That's awesome. Yeah. So now you don't do the world building.
Well, I do it, but
on the go.
Don't let it control me.
on the go, but you start with the framework. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, how much do you do framework?
I need to have a general idea of how people live from day to day. Mm-hmm. That's how you're going to introduce your character. They're going to be, do they take public transportation? Do they watch TV? Do they, how do they live their daily lives? Because you need to know that as you explore how the story begins, as they're living. You have to know certain details about life. Just simple things that you don't even think about, like, do people 200 years from now have to brush their teeth? Is something that I should write, that, because if they don't brush their teeth, how can I include that? Because somebody's not going to be thinking, 200 years ago, they used to brush their teeth. I'm glad I don't have to do that. So
yeah,
that's the struggle with science fiction that's written in the future, is there's going to be a lot of things that are different, but you can't just have an exposition. Oh, this is everything that's different from now to then. You have to release it gradually, and while not seeming like you're writing a bunch of minutia that's not important to the story either.
Yeah, I bet that's interesting.
But you have to have it in the back of your head. You can't.
Yeah.
You can't have a character whose head you're trying to get inside without knowing what is it that this person does with their life. What do they do for a job? You have, and that kind of leads to the framework. If you know what they do for a job, then you have to know, well, this is a job that people do. So if somebody for instance, as one of the characters in my book was a farmer on a colony world. Well, why do they have farmers? Why don't they have food factories in orbit that grow everything? Well,
Yeah.
maybe this world does it on purpose because they want to be back to nature. Well, what kind of a world would do that? What kind of people would want that? So that's how you get society. You have to think about what kind of a character you want to write, and then you have to start thinking, this is where the world building comes in. What kind of a world would make that kind of a character? Because that's the important part of the character. And then because there's something called the rule of cool.
Okay.
It sounds cool when you write it. You can always come up with a reason why that is, even if it's kind of counterintuitive.
I love that.
I want to have a farmer in the 23rd century. I got to come up with a reason why there's going to be farmers.
Yeah.
Have a farm instead of like a row of hydroponic, booths somewhere in orbit.
Yeah. I'm imagining like a guy with like a piece of straw in his mouth, but like standing on a spaceship. He's like, no, I'm just kidding. Yeah. That's an interesting concept. That's interesting. I like how so you have it sounds like because you also told me earlier that you're good at getting inside the characters' heads, and it sounds like the world building and the character development obviously are dependent on each other, maybe especially in science fiction. Like,
definitely.
Yeah.
You can't get inside someone's head unless you know what kind of a world they live in, what shapes who they are. And that's another thing that I think is important to science fiction. If you're dealing with people who grow up on different worlds, there's a lot of science fiction where it seems like everybody who's human thinks the same way. And I'm like, well, today I don't think the same way as someone from Russia or someone from China. We have different daily lives. We think things differently. So if you can't just take a person from Earth and say, oh, they're from Earth. Well, yeah, they're from Earth, but there's a lot of people on Earth. They all have different. Now I'm from this colony. Well, the whole world's not the same. Our world's not the same, and another world's not going to be the same. They don't seem to consider the fact that there's going to be more differences between people on one planet than there are between,
Well, even within the United States, like I'm in Idaho and you're in Florida, and it's totally different. Like I don't have to worry about hurricanes. So our whole houses.
I've lived in Florida my whole life. We've only had one hurricane come through this town.
Like when I was in California, though, we have earthquakes. I'm from California, and I come out. People are like, how can you live in California? Earthquakes, and it's like, well, every structure is built now to withstand some pretty significant earthquakes, and that's just a cultural thing that people in other parts of the country don't even have to think about. And so, anyways, I think
California is big enough that the differences between people up in Northern California and the ones in Southern California is like two different nations.
True. Northern California over up here. But yeah, so I'm thinking now that I'm listening to you talk, that's why your books are doing so well. Cause you were really putting a lot of thought into these kind of why and how things are happening. And it's making me very curious. I have never read military science fiction, and I'm kind of like, maybe.
I kind of got into military science fiction just because, well, for one thing, it was easiest to write my background. I mean, we write what we know. I was in the military. My father was in the military, so I have an idea of how to get into that. Plus, I was always one of those people that like the Star Wars thing with the space fighters, and that kind of drew me into reading military science fiction. So that's how I got into writing it. But the military part of it's mostly there to get the main characters into a situation where there's a lot of consequences and a lot at stake. I mean, I've read science fiction where the main characters are some run-of-the-mill job and just get swept up into things. But I kind of find it more believable when it's somebody who would actually be in a position where things happen that could affect the fate of the human race or the fate of a planet. And so I try not to count too much on coincidence, because as a kid,
it just happened.
You have some random character who happens to be uniquely qualified to save the day gets swept up into this conspiracy, But I'd rather have people who actually would be there. I mean, it's more believable to think that some guy in Delta Force would be in a position where he would be swept up in some, world-changing event than some guy who, worked at a Dairy Queen.
Like, do you watch Burn? Have you ever watched Burn Notice?
Yeah, my son used to love that show.
Okay, yeah, okay. So he's like a former CIA badass. He's gonna be. It's much more believable for him to be swept up into I'm gonna do these things with explosions and guns versus just some your local mechanic. It's way more believable.
Or the old shows from the '80s where it was always some California private investigator.
Yeah. My husband, we watch a lot of A-Team, okay? It's much more believable for them to get up in these situations.
Yeah.
Good stories. Okay, so tell me a little bit about some of the books. Now, we talked a little bit about your books. So what's coming out soon?
Right now I'm working on the third novel in the Recon series. Don't have a solid title yet. I'm still working on that. But the Recon series is about, the first book it tells the story of this character who's named Randall Monroe during this war that occurred in this universe, the big war between us and the Tawnee. He was a recon Marine who's kind of special forces type, and they were going to try to retake a colony that had been occupied by the enemy. And things were really, really bad. And he wound up the only survivor of the force, and he has to help organize the civilians' resistance against the Tawnee during the occupation. So the first one is about that. It's called Recon: A War to the Knife. War to the knife is a phrase that means a war or a battle when things get really desperate and you're down to knives, basically.
Ooh.
And he also has a backstory where Randall Monroe is not who he really is. He was born the genetically engineered, very specifically wanted heir to a executive in the corporate council, which is the monopolistic organization that runs the economy of the Commonwealth government. They were created because we went to war with the Tawnee, and you're fighting an interstellar war. So they said, we need to have our economy organized. We can't worry about, who's in charge of providing this resource for the military or this resource. So they were given an exemption from monopoly restrictions, and they never really let go of that. So 100 years later, they basically run the government. And he was engineered to be the heir for this woman who's very high up in the corporate council. But his great-grandfather was a U.S. Marine, very long-lived one, because it's the future. And this guy was right at the edge of when we developed the technology to let people live longer. So he has been around. He's over 200 years old, and he's been regaling this kid with stories of, the Marines and the military and everything. So when war breaks out again with the Tawnee, he wants to join the military. But his mother's like, no, that's what poor people do.
Oh.
So she's one of these people that has enough power that thinks they can get away with anything. So when his great-grandfather is trying to help him sneak away and join the Marines, she sends one of her security people after him, and he tries to kill him, and the kid accidentally kills the security guy. So he changes his identity and goes on the run and joins the Marines. So the few are also involved with the fact that he's on the run from his mother still, and he has to cut a deal with somebody else in the corporate council to stay away from her and to live his life independently.
Oh my gosh. Okay, stop. And if you want to know more.
Well, no, this is important to the second book. Because this isn't a spoiler or anything.
Okay.
By the second book, he's working basically as a mercenary for somebody else in the corporate council on an intermittent basis in order to stay free. So by the second book, he's out there having adventures, handling emergencies for the corporate council. So he's kind of working for the bad guys in a way too.
Yeah.
So, and he's trying to figure a way out of that. So that's the second book was called A Wolf in the Fold. And I won't go into details of that. But and the third book, which I haven't got a title to yet, it takes place just before the events of Birthright. They're in the same universe, but there's like a 10-year gap between this war that happened and the beginning of Birthright. So this is like a series that takes place in that gap.
Okay.
And then by the fourth novel, I hope to, be right up to where Birthright is. And then maybe at some point I can bring those characters together.
Ooh, like Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Christmas special. Oh my gosh! Oh, the David Tennant and Matt Smith. Yeah.
The main character of Glory Boy in the Birthright series is that farmer on a colony world named Caleb Mitchell, who winds up being in the military and being a special forces type of commando who's given all these technological enhancements.
Ooh.
Like kind of a superhero / commando type guy. And he's the main character of the first three books. And I leave off the third book with the possibility that he could still be involved in this kind of thing in the future. So I was thinking bringing those characters together would be interesting.
Dude, I'm sure your fans would be over the moon. I'm sure they'd be like, yes. But that sounds like that's a few years away. So
I hope not years. I'm trying. I wrote my last book in a month, so hopefully it won't be years.
Wow. Well, you've been doing this for a while, though. Like, I'm sure your first novels were not quite that fast.
Oh no, the first novels, it took me years to finish. I mean, I started writing the first two novels in the late '80s, and I finished them in the mid '90s.
Yeah.
The sequels to Duty, Honor, Planet, I wrote two sequels to that. Now, like I said, they're huge books. They were like 180 and 190,000.
Yeah.
Those both took over a year to finish. Especially, this is the other thing where I'm, trying to progress this. And I was not a plotter back then. I was what they call a pantser. So I never plotted more than a couple of chapters ahead. And honestly, it was more fun. It was more fun because I felt like I was reading the books as I was writing them. But it took a lot longer because you'd sit there and you'd think, you're like, where do I go from here? Whereas when you have a detailed plot, you're like, well, this is exactly where I need to go. I know exactly what they're going to be doing. And you can start working on it. And if you have to go back and refine it later, you can, but you can get something down on paper. Whereas when you're pantsing it in a novel, especially a series as twisty and turny as that one was, because Duty, Honor, Planet was a series with a lot of plot twists.
That's
and
awesome.
Came to me on the fly. And it took 14 months for one of them and 12 for the other. And then I started writing the second two novels in the Birthright trilogy, and those took a little under a year each. And then I wrote Glory Boy, and Glory Boy was different in that it was the first book that I had plotted with those characters in it that I had in my head, but I never wrote it because I thought at some point when I was writing the books for publication, I thought, well, it'd be more interesting if I went after their experiences in the war and wrote kind of like a space opera / spy thriller / cyberpunk thing, but I had all the details of what happened to him in the war written down because there were sections in each of these three books where he talked about it. I knew all the characters. I knew exactly what was going to happen. So I sat down and wrote that book in 3 months.
Oh.
This will be I didn't know what to do next. So I thought, I'll just write this. I'll put it out there. It's a cool little thing. Maybe I can throw it in, include it with a box set or something.
Yeah.
And then it sold better than anything I've ever written before.
Wow.
I mean, I shouldn't say it sold better. I didn't sell as many copies of it as I did of the first two, but I never put it down at 99 cents. It was like a $3.99 book.
Right.
I still, I made a lot of money off that book, and it just shows me I have no idea what the public wants, because I was thinking this is just something I'm gonna throw out there. So then I decided to write that book Recon, because there was a scene in Glory Boy during the war where he is on this planet where the guy gets stranded during the kind of listed occupation, and some of his friends get killed there, and they think everybody's dead, but the guy was left there. So I'm like, this would be a good.
That's a good story.
This one guy left there.
Yeah.
And I wrote that in 2 months. And then I wrote the next one was shorter. It was only like about 75,000 words, but it took me a month to finish that one.
Wow.
And so I'm thinking I can keep it between 2 to 3 months per release.
Yeah. Wow.
Hopefully it won't take years to get to the fifth book.
Yeah. Never mind then. But for new people, listen, if you're just starting out, it gets faster the more experience you have.
There's definitely a learning curve.
Yeah, there's a learning curve, and trying out different ways of writing is, it's not a bad thing. You try it out this way, to see what works for you. One of the things I think is important for people to know is that I think before you start writing, you have this idea in your head, or at least I do, or have, of what writing a book looks like. And in actuality, it's whatever it takes to get it down on the paper, right? It's not like there's
dog in a pipe.
It's not like there's like one, like, this is the way you write a book, A, B, C, D. Everybody who writes it writes like this, and if you don't write it like this, it's not a real book. That's not, it could be anything. So I
always had this image in my head of I guess it's from Dean Koontz, of a guy sitting with a typewriter with a golden retriever at his feet, and a pipe smoking in an ashtray.
Yeah, but you could do it. The important part is the end result, which is getting the book out, getting your story out into the hands of people, whether it's formatted correctly, whether it's, like all those things, get it out there. I think that's the most important part. And then you'll see how it goes from there. Where can people find you? Where can they get your books, and where can they find you?
I'm an Amazon exclusive author right now. All my books are in Kindle Unlimited. So you can find me on the Amazon author page for Rick Partlow. Search my name. And there's only me and the guy who is a Dolby artist and character actor. So you can tell the difference. Also, I have a Facebook author page, which is facebook.com/Duty Honor Planet.
Okay.
Kind of a mistake of naming it after the first series when the other one is more popular, but you really can't change the name. Not when you have that many followers.
No.
I have a website. I have not really done much work on it. It's not really that valuable, but if you want to look in WordPress for the science fiction of Rick Partlow, it's there. Mm-hmm. I sometimes make announcements on it, but most of my activity is on Facebook. So people connect with them on Facebook, like them on Facebook, and then if sometime in the future he decides to make his website more active, he will definitely let everybody on Facebook know. Definitely let him know.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to say thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Everybody, this is, again, you can find more interviews like this at allwriterswelcome.com or in the Facebook group. We're going to be posting these interviews, and also Megan and I will be giving tips and tricks and probably consolidating all that we learn from the people that we're talking to and making that available, because we want your books to be out in the world. Like, I'm a prolific reader, and and I'm like constantly searching for new authors because I can read pretty fast, and I'm like, where are they? And you might have a story in your head that needs to be out for people to read. So go find us at allwriterswelcome.com. Make sure to like Rick Partlow at Facebook if you have liked this interview at all, and we will see you later.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.